our panelists today have both tried to bring attention to waste management as a global problem. And David Newman, who's the president of the International Solid Waste Association, has been focusing on increasing financing for waste, which requires greater visibility to the issue and also a higher position in the list of priorities. And Mike Webster, who's the chair of WasteAid UK, has been helping to create jobs in some of the poorest parts of the world, while also improving waste management. And Mike Webster is also the curator of this month's theme, and he also requires increased visibility to waste management to carry on his work. So today, together we'll make a case for waste. And let me welcome our panelists today, David Newman and Mike Webster. Welcome to the 2016 Global Dialogue on Waste, and please introduce yourself. Mike, do you want to start with you?
Yes, hi, my name is Mike Webster. I'm now the director of WasteAid UK. We're a small NGO, and we are working in a variety of West African and East African countries. I've just returned from a week in Ghana where we're setting up a new community waste management project. The waste livelihoods aspect of what we do is an important part, and I'll come back to that in as much as fitting in with the criteria of the SDGs. But we're looking more broadly at total community waste management solutions. So the livelihoods are part of that. There's also an element where we're helping communities tap into that global recyclates market or the regional recyclates market, as well as looking at decent community level disposal options, because although obviously as much as we'd like to design, reuse, recycle everything out of waste, there's always an element of residual waste, and we can't just ignore that. So thank you for asking us to do this.
Yeah, good afternoon. ISWA, of course, works in a sort of dovetailed relationship on the other end of the spectrum that Mike has been talking about, and that is trying to work with international community, international governmental and non-governmental organizations, from the Commission, European Commission, down to the World Bank and the various affiliates of the World Bank around the world, and then with countries and cities, and through the UNEP and the UNIDO and the UNDP programs, to try to bring, firstly, try to bring attention, which I think we're succeeding in doing, to the whole waste management issue, and secondly, to try to bring finance and to bring capacity building to these places so that they can organize better their waste management, structures. As you all know, and I'm sure the people who have read your website, Ranjith, know very well, 70% of waste still goes into either one form of landfill or another, or into the open environment, and really you need the sort of community level work which WasteAid in the UK and elsewhere is doing, and you also need the political top-down level work which we're trying to do.
Great, thank you, David and Mike. So talking about sustainable development goals, they are focused on improving, or they were launched so that they could improve health, increase prosperity, create peace, and making the world generally a better place to live. But waste managers worldwide do this day in and day out already, and we've been doing this for nearly a century now. But waste being a unique and niche subject, how do we bring more attention to our story, and how do we make a case for waste? Maybe David, do you want to start?
Yeah, I've got a little bit of an advantage here, because just 2 days ago I got the last draft of our report, which we'll be giving in Serbia at the annual Congress next year, on the pathway to closing open dumps in developing countries. And in this report, which is about 90 pages long, we list how waste and the sustainability are linked. And I won't go through them all, but virtually on every has a role to play, whether it's about energy, whether it's about decent work, resilient structures, inequality. With Mike knows about when he is doing this on a community level, talks about food security and healthy lives. And as you quite rightly say, Ranjit, we've been doing this now for over 100 odd years in Western European countries. But I think to our friends who are listening in less developed countries, where waste is a day-to-day problem and they're living in and amongst it, the consolation which I can give to them is that so were we in developed countries not so many years ago. Okay, there wasn't the amount of waste which there is today, there wasn't the variety of it, but still we were dumping it, you know, in open dumps. We were burning it. We were actually, you know, even taking it out in barges and dumping it in the sea. So the pathway to improvement is a very clear one. We know how to do it. We have all the technologies. We just don't have, I think, what you've pinpointed, the willpower in a lot of countries to do it. Now, why is waste down the agenda? I would suggest 2 or 3 reasons. Firstly, where the wealthy and the middle class and the political classes live in countries, in developing countries, the cities are clean. I live in a medium high income country, and where I live, it's clean. I get 10 miles in there, I get in the car and drive 10 miles away, and there's trash everywhere. But the elites, in other words, decision-making classes, are not seeing this, or if they are, they regard it as a poverty problem and not their problem. And I think you could probably see this if you look in India as well, where you will see very clean city centres, very nicely swept wide boulevards, and then 5 miles away open dumps burning. But really, the elites don't care, because it's just poor people there, you know. It's somebody else's problem. And I think the second question is that we showed this in our report over the last couple of years with UNEP, is that urban development has happened so fast. It's just caught everybody unawares and by surprise. You know, I live in a city now which is 2.5 million people. 10 years ago it was 1 million, and just the municipal infrastructure has just not been developed quickly enough to be able to handle it, and it's just exploded out of all recognition. Lagos is going to be a city of 100 million people by the end of this city. I mean, you know, by the end of this century. No one can get their head around that, and no one can plan for that volume of people and that volume of waste that's going to create. It's just too big. You know, it's just a huge, great problem, and it takes a long time to get your head around it. And thirdly, it takes a lot of money. And the question about money is a question of prioritizing. And I think there's, I've written many times, there's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of money being siphoned off of the poorest countries into Swiss or Panama bank accounts. Politicians have not got their priorities right in terms of protecting their citizens' health, and we see that in water systems, sewage systems, waste systems, and public care and health and transport systems throughout the developing world.
Great, thank you, David. Mike, do you want to talk about, you know, how we can bring more attention to our story? You know, waste managers around the world doing what the SDGs want us to do almost day in and day out.
Absolutely. For a start, no, I second everything David said. I think one of the key reasons that we essentially as a species are struggling to deal with these issues is that there are more of us, we're producing lots more waste, and we're living in these much greater conurbations. So these are new issues. Many of the materials we're dealing with, frankly, just didn't exist 50 years ago. So we're, I guess, playing organisational and even conceptual catch-up to the situation we find ourselves in. But regarding the SDGs, you know, as essentially they are a set of you know, now they have been approved. They're essentially a set of goals within themselves. So when you can say to a donor or a potential partner, this project, this approach will deliver SDG 3 or 11 or what have you, it becomes almost a goal in itself. So our challenge as waste managers is to fit in with each of those SDGs and understand the impact that our work has. Now, the challenge and the opportunity that we have is that waste is actually, at WasteAid we'd argue that waste impacts on each of the 17 SDGs in some way or another. It's great to see out of the Global Waste Management Outlook, published by UNEP and ISWA, that they identified specific SDGs that were impacted by various different bits of waste. But for us, talking to people who don't essentially get the waste issue, we have to explain to them how it impacts directly on public health, how it impacts directly on the potential for livelihoods, even areas of gender empowerment, areas of, for instance, how it impacts and improves on the state of the oceans. All of these different SDGs somehow are impacted by waste, and it is our challenge, I guess, to explain to people, particularly when they just don't get the waste management is a good thing to do for its own sake, that it impacts on a whole variety. Well, we would argue all of them, and others would say specific ones more strongly than others. But obviously, for instance, sustainable consumption production, which is number 12, I think, off the top of my head. Yep, it's obviously there's a direct impact from better waste to resource, that shift to waste to resource management. But for instance, Sustainable Development Goal 2, zero hunger. If we're wasting a third of our food on the way from the farm to the fork, well, clearly there's a waste prevention issue there. If we are looking at issues around, for instance, sustainable cities and communities, it's our cities where poor waste management can cause most harm, and also there are lots of opportunities. And as David said, as waste management is, I guess, a byproduct of economic development. Economic development is a good thing, but it impacts on the poorest within those cities. So if we were talking about one of these, for instance, these megacities like Lagos, the waste will be produced largely by the wealthier and impacted mainly on the poorer. So there is an inequality issue there for us to be talking about. So it's our job as waste managers to start speaking the same language that everyone else is, and just make sure we can get those little pinch points here and there, so people will understand why improved waste management is a good thing. Hopefully we'll be able to get to that point where we can just say it's a good thing in itself, but at the moment we have to explain why it's important for public health or inequality or what have you.
Yeah, can I jump in there, Ranjith? I think one of the mistakes that has been made and by the environmental movement over the last 10-15 years is the mantra on recycling. We have all been obsessed with the goodness of recycling, how good it is for our environment. Stop cutting down trees, or stop digging bauxite out of the earth and recycling aluminium cans. But we have only told part of the tale, and that only telling part of the tale has actually created a huge amount of confusion, because wherever you go, everybody's convinced that recycling is actually an economically advantageous activity to undertake. Now, it may be at the very, very lowest ends of society, and as Mike and WasteAid are doing, working with local communities in poor countries, there are some economic benefits to be got out of recycling. But certain for a middle-class urban dweller of a city like Mumbai or Buenos Aires, it is just a cost. And the more we recycle, the more it costs. And we have really failed to get through the message that it's not just about recycling. Or if it is about recycling, we have to be prepared to put our money where our mouths are. And we have to be prepared to invest in collection and sorting infrastructure, and to be able to subsidize the sale of that material to countries where they will treat it, or to plants where they will treat it, often at a much higher cost than the material itself is intrinsically worth on the market. So I think we've made a very serious error, and a message 10 or 15 years ago should have been, yeah, recycling's great, but hey guys, let's get the stuff off the streets. Let's get the collection systems right. Let's get sanitary landfills built. Let's get storage facility built. Let's get our healthcare and our medical waste out of open dumps. Let's get our toxic industrial waste out of open dumps. And these should have been the messages, but we've been sidetracked. And now this is not a message to say recycling is the wrong thing to do. Recycling is absolutely the right thing to do, but it comes with a cost, which developing countries find great difficulty facing, and therefore do nothing.
There are so many points that you mentioned that are extremely valid, and I think most of that happened because developed countries were doing something, and when developing countries wanted to develop, they kind of tried to just emulate what they were doing, and then the technology transfer part, and trying to do something, trying to become like them. I think that kind of led to them also focusing more on recycling and not on the collection systems and the landfills, which are extremely kind of the bedrock of any good waste management system. So that's wonderful. And one of the questions I wanted to ask is, like Mike mentioned, when you look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, you see that almost all of them are relevant to waste management directly or indirectly at some level. And you organize a lot of meetings and attend a lot of meetings. So what's the conversation around SDGs and waste? What are the most important SDGs that we should focus on in your meetings? I mean, what do you hear about SDGs in your meetings, David?
I think the conversation really is all about health. I mean, that's how waste management started, in the 19th century, and I think it's still valid today. That if we want sustainable development, we have to have healthy communities, and healthy communities means getting waste off the streets, as we said, and getting it treated properly. So I think that the meetings I go to around the world, the principal, well, certainly in the developing world, the principal conversation is about health. I think the second conversation is about urban blight. And what a mess waste makes. You go to Jakarta, where the Dutch in the empire built those wonderful drainage canals, and those wonderful drainage canals today are all full of bottles, plastic bottles, and this is really ugly to look at. And I think that a lot of the middle class inhabitants of these cities are now realizing that the waste is a problem because it's just so damn horrible to live in trash. Okay, regardless of the health problem, it's just ugly. And I think the big question is the marine and ocean litter question, and the amount of trash going into the seas. I think that is a real concern, particularly for those countries that are heavily dependent upon tourism, and countries where fishing and the coastal fishing communities are heavily dependent upon on the quality of the sea for their livelihoods.
So what has your experiences been when you're going for funding out there? What kind of response do you get from funding agencies when they talk about SDGs, and which ones do you use the most to get funding from those organizations?
What we have actually been initially focusing a lot of the interest in supporting our work has actually come from livelihood development. Waste livelihood development is necessarily pro-poor. Essentially, the people who are interested in adding value from residual waste are the poorest in society, as David pointed out. We find that the balance of income versus the value of resources actually works well in the poorest societies. When people are living on less than $1 a day, if you can make $3 or $4 or $5 a day collecting various materials, either reprocessing them with yourselves using the livelihoods approach, or bulking and passing on to merchants, actually that's a 300% increase in your income. So for the very poorest, we have found that mainly it's been about livelihoods. So I would, at a guess, say that was either addressing inequality, which is number 10, SDG 10, or would be looking at SDG 1, addressing poverty. I would also, I thought it was very interesting what David was saying about public health. I started working in this sector because I was an environmentalist, but I found over the last 2 or 3 years I've been increasingly talking about public health. In the work that we do, recycling is a way of adding value and creating a value chain for materials that are there, and hence incentivizing their collection. It's actually the collection that we're interested in and reducing the harm that it does. And so that is why, for instance, we've increasingly been interested in community level disposal options. It is the yes, it's the least attractive part of waste management, is actually dealing with the disposal, but containing material, dealing with it in an organised way, using very simple approaches to have organised collections, and then set up a community system that can actually select a disposal area, is something that we are increasingly talking about now. Obviously, we'll work with waste hierarchy, and as much as possible is recycled, composted, and so forth. So actually, by the time you get to disposal, if you're organised, there shouldn't be too much there, but you can't ignore it. And as I said, public health is something we're increasingly talking about, and that public health message is associated with things like environmental enteropathy, where we're seeing long-term stunting, nutritional malabsorption, underdevelopment of children, lack of brain development leading to lack of intellectual and educational attainment, which leads to children underperforming, not fulfilling their potential. So essentially what we're trying to say is that waste is a development issue. It's not just a nice to have along with, pot plants on your dual carriageway and street lights. It's fundamental to the development and the well-being of your children. If you want your kids to grow up to fulfill their potential and become all of those professions that you need to develop your country, you need to sort out your waste management system.
Great. David, do you have any comments on that?
The report which we're just giving in Serbia, and the report we did last year on I think we called it anyway on waste dumps last year, we reported that the population the size of France, about 65 million people, live in or immediately in the surroundings of open dumps globally, and the 50 biggest open dumps globally are the most polluted sites on Earth. And there, as Mike says, you can see the whole litany of illnesses and sicknesses which come from poor waste treatment, from bad air quality, from respiratory diseases, to increases in malaria and dengue fever, to terrible skin diseases. I mean, it's a really disgusting situation. And that these sites are not yet on the radar of the international aid and development community is really something that's actually quite scandalous. And because closing some of these dumps is a relatively, in terms of engineering, is a relatively easy task. But there are all the problems, and this is where it's difficult, all the problems of governance and finance to get these places closed and to have the proper sanitary landfills built in their place. And so it really is a big health question. On a positive note, in March I was at the Global Environment Facilities in UNEP offices in Washington, and the first thing they said to us as we came through the door was, congratulations, you've really pushed waste up the agenda, because we are now getting a lot of countries are now asking us for finance for waste facilities. So something is happening. It's not all bad news.
So I was asking, what do you think about the status of the amount of attention that there is to waste management as an issue?
The space that we are working in, as David mentioned, is really we're working from the grassroots end. We're hoping to complement, come at it from the other end, from ISWA doing the top-down angle, which is, of course, absolutely vital. What we are trying to do is, within the community development space, develop, I guess, a discipline of solid waste management, get more people thinking about it in the same way that, for instance, the water and sanitation sector has pushed the community development angle. And we find that we have in our partner countries, in low-income countries, we have lots of partners approaching us because it's an issue that it's frankly visible. You know, people know that there's a massive waste issue. You look at litter, I mean, particularly plastic waste, because of its longevity, is an eyesore. Let alone you know, driving all of the other, you know, particularly public health and environmental issues that we've been talking about. So in the partner countries, there's a high awareness. We are engaging at the moment with the waste sector within the UK, and we're really beginning to get some momentum there, and quite a lot of support and awareness. We are beginning to talk to the development scene, I guess, the international development scene in Europe, and sometimes I get blank stares, and sometimes we get people very enthusiastic about the issue. I think we still need to have almost you know, a single bit of paper that says to people, you know, waste matters because A, B, C, D, E. You know, the GWMO is, you know, a fantastic document. We need to get more people who aren't waste specialists reading that, you know, reading the decision maker summary. And so whilst you know, I can talk particularly in the UK, the waste sector is beginning to get it. We are still feel like we're trying to make water flow uphill with the rest of the development sector at the moment. There's a few people that get it. Our partners in, you know, particularly we're doing a lot of work in sub-Saharan Africa at the moment, get it. I mean, I've got, you know, I get emails pretty much every day from organisations saying, finally, we found someone who's interested in this. We've been going on about this for years, and these are all local community-based organisations. And our vision is really to have a network of locally based, community-based organisations that can start really pushing their government to improve solid waste. That's what happened in the UK 150 years ago. London was, you know, an absolute cesspit and full of hundreds of thousands of people dying from entirely preventable diseases. Civil society got together and pushed for the creation of what I guess we could call modern municipalities that started delivering waste collection. That's what we'd like to see in our partner countries.
I think that's the problem with waste, like David also mentioned earlier, which is waste is a preventable problem. At least the impacts of waste on health is totally preventable. It's not like some types of cancer or some other diseases which do not have a cure or need more science, which we've never found. But it's something that, you know, solutions exist. All it needs is you know, a little financing, organizing, and, you know, more collaboration, and of course higher political priority. So moving on to the next question. So all of us in the sector know that economic development and waste management are closely linked. And for example, developed or rapidly developing economies have a greater need and higher appreciation for waste management services. So now, given that's the case, so do you think there'll be more recognition to waste after more economic development in the coming years? And do you think we're trying too hard, too early right now, you know, trying to, like you said, make water flow uphill at this point? Either one of you.
If you could just crystallize the question. So you're saying that what technologically developing countries are focusing on the wrong aspects, or what would you? Sorry.
No, I'm asking. Given that we talk so much about bringing more attention to waste management as a problem, do you think with more economic development in the future, appreciation for waste will increase in the future, and are we trying too early, too hard to bring that, you know, attention to waste as a problem?
I think as there's more understanding and attention paid to waste management, essentially, in my view, the more people you have thinking about a problem, the more likely you are to have interesting breakthroughs. I mean, our approach is essentially, at the end of the day, getting more people talking about waste, knowing some of the basics of how to manage and deliver it. But the more people you have thinking and talking about an issue, the more likely you are to have someone thinking up a fantastic new approach to, either getting value out of a material that was previously considered waste, or designing out waste, or dealing, the plastic issue at the moment. For instance, I mean, we've started seeing quite a few African countries introduce plastic bag bans, and I've, personally, and even just in an anecdotal approach, that has actually transformed the street scene in quite a few cities. I mean, I've not been to Kigali in Rwanda, but I understand it's absolutely spotless these days. I was out in the little West African state of the Gambia last year, and they introduced a plastic bag ban, and actually, with over a couple of months, it transformed. All of a sudden, the place wasn't just festooned with litter, and it wasn't blocking up drains and so forth. So as more people think about it, as there's pressure on government to actually act, things can improve. So more people thinking about things, you're more likely to get a solution.
All right.
Yeah, I think Mike's absolutely right. And I've been running around for ISWA now since about 2006, so about 10 years. And when we first started to go to the climate change negotiations, the first one we went to was in Copenhagen, and our guys were standing out in the freezing cold for hours and hours trying to get into that disastrous meeting, and the word waste, I don't think, appeared in any one of the documents that came out of it. Well, we were in the climate change meeting in Paris last year, and waste was on the agenda in almost every session in one way or the other. Resource management. So it wasn't just any more about energy and renewable energy. It was also about preventing the use of energy by recycling and by resource management. And so it took years of hammering that message home, but that message at the highest level has now been got across. And I was in the United Nations Environmental Assembly in Nairobi just back in May, and you would have been, I think, overwhelmed, Mike, because the number of stands in the sort of exhibition area of NGOs, all proposing solutions for waste management in local communities in Africa, was overwhelming. From people doing their briquettes to fuel their kilns and their fires, to making pavements out of waste rubber and plastic, and all the stories that from your community works. And waste again was center of the attention of the United Nations Environmental Assembly, and actually had quite a series of motions passed by governments unanimously to focus attention onto waste. So I think we have gone over the curve of having to get ourselves recognized as a sustainable development goal, as a solution, and as a problem. I think that curve is now just about on the sort of downhill stretch. Now I think the battle, and I've written about this, the battle is completely another battle, and the battle is about making sure that the governance and the financial infrastructure in communities, in countries, and in cities where waste management has to be brought are sufficiently reliable to make sure that that money is spent where it should be spent, rather than ending up in Panama.
So we're almost towards the end of the session. So before we conclude, I just wanted to touch upon some more points that Mike mentioned. For example, he started as an environmentalist, and I think it's a similar story with me. Started as an environmentalist to save the environment, and after getting into waste, kind of the whole focus changed to improving public health, making it improving quality of life. Because in many of the communities that I've seen around the world, I mean, these are the actual real today's problems that they face. So unless you fix problems for today's generations, unless you make them live better, there is no way the future generations will be any better off than without the parents' generation being better. So I think that was one important point that's been a important transition in it looks like in Mike's career and also my career. So David and Mike, do you have any concluding remarks before we end the session?
Thank you. I mean, waste is ultimately a governance issue. It's pretty simple to collect material up and take it to another site. The challenge is, how do you get that paid for? Who pays? How is it? How do you deliver that in a long-term way? What we are currently doing is trying to provide, I guess, short to medium-term solutions. People are living essentially in filth at the moment. How do we set up a system to get that picked up? In the longer term, we would like to see something similar to, for instance, a municipality doing it on a larger scale. But we want solutions now for people. The SDGs are really important for us as a sector to learn how we can slot in best. We are still, I think, learning how to speak the language of community development people, and we would like also those community development folk to start speaking the language of waste, so they understand, the importance of a decent disposal option, the importance of end markets if you're setting up a recycling system, the importance of a decent business case to make sure you can set up a value chain for recyclates. The issues around public health is not just about some of these broader environmental issues, which of course are very important, but we have to talk in an immediate way to the problems that people are facing today and tomorrow, and often that comes back to public health and income and livelihoods.
Great, thank you, Mike and David.
Mike, I really admire your courage and your tenacity of going into these communities, and I hope that you are successful. The more and more of these happen, and please feel free to lean on our shoulders for anything that we can do to help. My final message perhaps is a slightly different one. I've come to the conclusion over the last 4 years that the issue is governance, and with governance is finance. And what has really struck me in my research over the last few months, and I said this in Nairobi at the UNEA meeting, is that we only need about $60 billion a year to do our waste systems around the world in developing countries. Now, $60 billion a year sounds like a huge amount of money, but you know what? It represents 0.5% of all the money hidden away by tax evaders in offshore bank accounts around the world. 0.5% of the $12 trillion that are held in the British Virgin Islands, that are held in Panama, Guernsey, Luxembourg, and so on. So the issue is not about the technology, the systems. It's even not about the planning, in a way that, because people in developing countries are not stupid. It's about having the financial resources to do all that. Those financial resources are there. They are robbed daily by elites, political and business elites from developing countries. Africa alone every year leaches £84 billion of tax money through tax evasion, which could be spent on its public health and public waste water systems. So the issue is about governance, and governance comes down to democracy. Government comes down to people in countries making their voices heard through electoral systems and making the elites keep the promises that they make at the times of their elections. And that's a big, big, big call. It's not an ISWA issue or a waste aid issue. It's an international issue, and the issue of governance and the issue of corruption and tax evasion is really the clue to it all.
Well, it's a societal issue, and I think in future, as I think Professor Paul Brunner was mentioning this in our last panel, saying that the rest of the economy is generally controlled by consumption and everything that happens, which is the major stake, whereas waste management is less than 1% of the economy. So I think waste management will be influenced by all the other factors and all the other driving forces that happen So I think it's a societal issue overall, and that's how I think we'll see change in the future. But I just wanted to mention a final few points before we close the discussion. First of all, congratulations to David for his leadership with ISWA. I've been in the sector a very short career from 2009, and I've seen then when I just joined the sector, there was literally no recognition for waste management. I was just banging my head like, why it's such an important topic, but it just doesn't get any recognition. But I think after David joined, I think things really changed, and the example he mentioned with Copenhagen, and then in Paris, that really shows the kinds of changes that happen. And Mike's leadership at WasteAid UK, I've just seen the recent fundraising event where you walked up the hill with the trash bin. That's amazing, I think. And definitely all the best with more such creative fundraising ideas, and all the best to both of you with your organizations. And one final point is one of our contributors, Zoe Lenkovich, who also works with WasteAid UK. She's made a wonderful infographic about sustainable development goals and how they relate to waste management, and I think you should definitely check that infographic out. It's on WasteAid UK's website, I think. So with this, let's conclude the panel, and thank you all for listening in. And follow us on social media and on our website for more updates about upcoming panels. And we'll have a panel every week until the end of September, except the week when ISWA conference is happening in Serbia. So hope to see you guys again, and thank you very much. See you then.
Thank you.